Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. Disasters can either make or break leaders. Most don't know how they're going to react in a crisis, and most have never had formal training. In this episode, I talk with Eric McNulty. Eric's actually an expert when it comes to leadership in a time of crisis. He's written a book called You're It, Crisis Change and How to Lead When It Matters Most, but he also works as an associate director at the National Preparedness Leadership Institute at Harvard University. So stay tuned as I talk to Eric about what leaders really need when it comes to leading in a time of crisis. Hey, Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Leanne. How are you today?
I'm good. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today. A little bit about yourself and a little bit about the work you're doing. So before we get started, can you just explain a little bit about your background?
Sure. It's a long and twisted tale, but the short version is that I spent many years in marketing communications roles, finally ending up at Harvard, actually over at the business school, at the Harvard Business Publishing, publishers of HBR and quite a number of books. And so I worked there for about a decade, learned a lot about management and leadership there. And then in 2008, had the opportunity to come over to this program, the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, joined them initially to help them write books, develop case studies, and that evolved into actually deploying into disasters to do research and teaching cases, developing programs, and going all over the place, doing this interesting disaster preparedness and response work.
That's awesome. So can you tell, for those who might not be familiar with the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, can you speak to what it is, how it was funded, the background?
Absolutely. So the NPLI is a joint program of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. It is the world's longest title. But we're a joint program between the two schools, and we were founded shortly after 9/11 when the federal government in the U.S. realized that the various agencies that had to prepare for and respond to disasters weren't playing particularly well together. And then once they figured out how to play well with each other at the federal level, they had to think about state, about local, about private, about nonprofits. And so we were founded and originally funded up here to develop a leadership platform to help people along that steep learning curve of how do you deal with this new world, new at the time, of these complex mega disasters, be it an attack like 9/11, be it a major industrial accident, be it a natural disaster, whatever it is. You've got to bring a lot of people, different agencies together to work cooperatively and collaboratively. How do you do that? How do you lead through that? And so our focus now, these 16, 17 years later, has continually evolved, but always looking at the human factors. We're looking at the leadership aspect of things, not the management piece. That's really important, but we do something that complements that, which is looking at that, how do people behave under stress? How do you lead in the midst of great ambiguity? How do you maintain your calm and resolve when things look pretty bleak? How do you rally lots of disparate stakeholders together? So that's where our work really centers. And we're fortunate to be able to deploy into the field to be with leaders in the moment, during crises, or as soon afterwards as we can get there. So today, as you and I are speaking here by a computer, two of my colleagues are down at the CDC talking to people about coronavirus and seeing what's happening there. So, I myself deployed to Deepwater Horizon, to Sandy, was out with H1N1. So really getting on the ground, that's what makes a difference, I think, between our work and that of others, is that we are with people. We're not doing consulting or sort of in the moment analysis, but trying to find what are the principles, what works and what doesn't, that we can share with other people who have to lead in similar situations.
That's really important. I know that I teach communities here in Canada on kind of that resilience, that preparedness piece, really around the business side of it. But I've seen over and over again that these kinds of situations can make or break your leaders. You see mayors are very uncomfortable speaking to the media, and then others thrive in these situations in the moment of crisis. And so, that work you're doing is really important. I know one of the things that you guys work on, it's called, I think you've coined the term MetaLeadership. Can you speak a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So MetaLeadership is our framework that we use. And the meta prefix is meant to encourage people to take a very broad view of what's happening, to understand who are all the stakeholders, what are not just the short-term concerns, what are the long-term implications for the response and the recovery, as well as when you're thinking about preparedness, be thinking in sort of multiple time horizons. And so meta really pulls people back to take a broader view of what may happen and look at a fuller range of possibilities. There are 3 dimensions in that framework. It's pretty simple conceptually. The first is the person. Who are you? If you're going to be leading, how well do you know yourself? Are you grounded cognitively, emotionally, psychologically? Can you remain calm and productive in the middle of a crisis? The second dimension is the situation. What's actually happening, and therefore, what do you do about it? And that can be a real stumbling block for people, again, because as the way our brains are wired, we tend to get very narrow in our focus when we face a threat. And that puts you very, what's my threat to my survival right this minute? And if you're faced with an active shooter, that may be the appropriate place to be. But if you're a mayor or a CEO and you're trying to lead a response to a broader, longer challenge like the coronavirus, you can't get stuck in that narrow view. You have to understand the implications of that larger picture and the various stakeholders involved. And the third dimension is connectivity. Do you have the relationships with all the appropriate stakeholders? Can you link and leverage resources, efforts, expertise to get a better outcome faster than if you all worked individually? So thinking through, okay, what's going on with me as an individual, as a leader, what's happening to me personally, what's the situation and what does that context call for? And then who are the people and the organizations I can bring together to rally to get to that best possible outcome? That's the MetaLeadership framework in brief.
That's great. And I'll make sure and put some reference in the video description on your organization and how to connect and find out more information. How, if someone wants to take courses from the Institute, is it open to the general public or how does that work?
So we have 2 open enrollment courses. We have an Emerging Leaders program coming up in March, and that's a 1-week program here on campus, and generally for mid-career people. And it's a real mix of public, private, nonprofit, domestic, international. We really mix the crowd intentionally because people learn a lot from each other and how people come at these kind of crises from different perspectives. It's a very intensive course. It's a lot of fun, but you're on campus for 4.5 days. And then our more senior leader program, that runs, you come for a week in December. Then while you're here, you get into a project team and you work on a real life project for 6 months, come back in June for another week, and that's what finishes that. That's also open enrollment. And it's rolling admission, so people can go to our website, which I'm sure you'll post on here, or it's npli.sph.harvard.edu. The applications are there, and do that. We also do a lot of training directly with individual agencies and organizations. So I was just last week with a group of first responders in the greater Boston area. We have a regional security initiative here, and they are able to bring together firefighters, police, EMS from the communities around Boston, and we did a 3-day training. And we go to various places and do various things like that. So we try and spread the knowledge as much as we can. We have a book out, we have videos on YouTube, we do a lot of case histories that are on our website that people can go back and see what were the leadership lessons from the various events we've studied. And so part of our educational mission is to spread this as wide as possible.
Well, and the only way you're going to get better is by looking at what you've done, learn from that, and get better, right?
That's right.
Those case studies are important, and the learnings and what you did bad. I mean,
Yeah.
improve next time.
No, and it's one of the things we have learned over the years is that across the various specialties of people we have trained is that this is a field where people tend to come up through an operational career path, and they are good at the doing. They have not necessarily been given a lot of training or exposure to, so how do you lead an organization? How do you actually deal with some of those human factors? They're really good at allocating resources or setting up an ICS system, whatever, or deploying people. But then what are the behaviors that make a difference? How do you actually come into a situation being who you need to be as well as doing what you need to do? And so we try and give people that opportunity, give them that knowledge, because again, many people have not really been exposed to it very much. And then they get put into positions where they're expected to lead. And we don't think we should have a lot of accidental leaders out there. We'd like it to be much more intentional.
Yeah, that's right. And I know you alluded to it at the beginning, just kind of your background. I'm just curious, I know you've written books on this area, some research documents. From your, just kind of what you've seen, What would you say some of the top kind of issues that leaders face or fall short of and need to improve on?
So I think there are a number, and I think one of the biggest challenges right now is just how quickly incidents move. And that's in part because we are very interconnected, as we're seeing coronavirus right now spreading very quickly because we are just a very interconnected planet, but then also because of the ubiquitous social media. I like to say we're in a world where almost everyone can see almost everything in almost real time. And that puts tremendous pressure on leaders because what you're doing can be under a microscope really, really quickly. You don't have a lot of room to make missteps and recover. And that's a big challenge. And it's a very public undertaking. Again, you can have anyone show up with a cell phone and they basically, they've got a camera and a video production studio in their hands. So it isn't, just because the news crew hasn't shown up doesn't mean that somebody isn't recording you and broadcasting it live around the world. And so that's a real challenge for people. And I think that we still need to get people in more senior positions comfortable with that always on media environment and realizing that that's the world in which they have to live. You can't make it go away, sadly. I think one of the great opportunities these days is, pardon me, we'll stop there. I think one of the great opportunities these days is how much more we're learning about neuroscience and how our brains work. Everything from the basic instinctual threat responses I mentioned earlier and how to control that, learning some deep breathing and some mindfulness exercises, help people reassert control over their brains under intense pressure. But things like cognitive bias and understanding that the way that you look at a situation will be different than how I see it. And chances are we're both right and we're both wrong at the same time because we're seeing what we see and we're bringing our own perspective to it, but neither one of us can see everything that the other person is seeing.
Yeah.
So I think that leading now has become much more inclusive and much more about asking questions and drawing out of people what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, what they can contribute, as opposed to the old commander, give direction down, have all the answers, and just tell people what to do. So it's a much more inquisitiveness-based pursuit these days. And again, that can be tough for people who came up in a different environment to adjust to that. So those are certainly two, and then certainly the threat matrix we're facing. I mean, I was this morning at the IBM cyber range, going through an exercise of a complex cyber event. And then you step out the door and on the news is unrest in parts of the world. You're looking at coronavirus, the earthquake we had yesterday off of Cuba. I mean, it's just a lot going on. Sad to say, this is a growth industry, which is, it's good for employment, but it's not really good for society.
Exactly. No, that's very true. So before we wrap up, is there anything maybe I've missed that you wanted to say before we close?
Well, first of all, I want to give a great thank you to yourself and to all of those who watch your channel who are out doing this work. I mean, our communities are safer and more resilient because of the work of people who are willing to step up. When they see that you're it moment, they raise their hand and say, yep, I'm it, let's go. They walk into danger, they engage with communities, they do a lot of hard work that is often unappreciated. And I think, and as much as we love our first responders, we can't forget those who are involved in preparedness and mitigation and then long-term recovery who get less attention. Again, these are people doing good work, they dedicate their lives and they give a lot to society. So I want to say, very much thank you to them. And to those who may be watching this curious, thinking about this, especially young people thinking about a career, look at this. Yeah. Look at this area as a place that you can contribute, you can build a great career, you can have a very satisfying life, and know that you're doing good things for the world. So every agency I talk to is saying, how do we find more good people to hire? So there are opportunities, and it's a great place to jump in and you meet really fun, interesting people, and you do incredibly interesting work.
And I couldn't say it better. I know every time I meet someone who's been in a disaster, who's been on the front lines, they want to pay it forward. They want, because they don't want you to go through what they went through.
Absolutely.
And, they're so willing to help. So thank you for all the work you do. Like I said, I will put all those links on, and I really appreciate the work you're doing to equip leaders to take a leadership role in these areas, because there's nowhere else. There's very little they can draw on, like content like you provide. So thanks again for taking the time, and take care.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Leanne. Take care.